we're in this like tropical storm where, it's on a 100-foot boat where it was difficult to sleep, for like 36 hours and difficult to even walk because you would like go and the boat would catch air and then it would hit the water
Oh
and
my
you'd
God.
fall. And, and so you just sit there and you just hope that you can get through it and everything will be fine.
Andrew Lewin has had the opportunity to work in the Gulf of Mexico, the Arctic, and the Atlantic Ocean as a marine biologist. He's coming to us today from Burlington, Ontario, and he's going to tell us everything about that job and how it works. So without any further delay, here's Andrew. Hey, Andrew, welcome to Tales from the Shift. How you doing?
Thanks, Shane. I am so happy to be here.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, marine biologist, why don't we get right into it? Tell us what a marine biologist is and what do you do?
So, it's kind of funny when you ask that question because there's so many things that a marine biologist can do, from actual science. So you're in the field looking at trends from animals to habitats like coral reefs and seagrasses and salt marshes and coastal lands, or going in to look at oceanographic processes. So, chemical oceanography, physical oceanography. And so there's a wide breadth of the science that you can do. You can do laboratory work, you can do modeling, like computer modeling and looking at fisheries and how that's modeled and how we can predict different changes in the environment. You can look at like the human aspect of how we, disturb or influence, just different processes, animals, like through our extraction of animals and climate change and so forth. And then you look at the science communication aspect. You can communicate science, which is what I do. And I talk about, what's happening in the ocean and how people can live for a better ocean by just taking like small little actions in their daily lives and voting for, politicians who want to do good for the ocean as well.
Yeah. So what's your path been? You say science communication advisor. Did you do anything prior to getting into that area of it?
But yeah, absolutely. So, I'm a marine biologist who grew up in Toronto and live in Ontario. So it's very difficult to do marine biology like a straight path. So it's a meandering path to say the least. And a lot of scientists go through this or marine biologists who want to do this, aspiring marine biologists. So I went to school, did my 4-year degree here in Ontario at a University of Guelph. And then I did a wetlands job here in Ontario. And so I went in Toronto and we did a bunch of assessments and stuff like that, which is really cool. I did that for 6 months. And then I went out and I went down to the Gulf of Mexico, got a job as a marine technician. So I was in the field working on a boat where we had other scientists come on, some pretty cool scientists go like looking at the Mississippi plume, which is basically all the phytoplankton that comes out. Mississippi plume is everything. Like Mississippi is a very powerful river, and it extends the plume itself, like all the stuff that comes out. So the fresh water, the mixture of sediments, some of the pollution that comes out. And in the spring, you get like the phytoplankton bloom. And that's just like these big, unicellular organisms that basically are plant cells. They come out and they will drift all the way, like almost to Texas, that far. And it just goes, it's a huge, like, I think one time we were down there was like 22,000 square kilometers in terms of how much it covers. But then what happens is during the summer, the wind that dies down, everything kind of just, all the phytoplankton die, they go down to the bottom. And, at the bottom, they get all these little multicellular cells get eaten up by microbes, the bacterial loop. And so they use oxygen when they digest those. And so that digestion of oxygen depletes oxygen at the bottom. And there's so much phytoplankton at times that it makes the entire bottom where those phytoplankton are hypoxic, meaning there's no oxygen. So like technically nothing can live there, especially if there's no mixing of the water. So in the summer, when there's no mixing of the water, we would measure the hypoxia layer within that. So that's just like one of the studies that goes on annually. It has a lot of implications. Like the person who does that, Dr. Nancy Rabelais, she would go to Congress and like they would regulate how much fertilizer and how much nutrients goes into the Mississippi all the way up to like where it starts, Minnesota, all the way down. And that study kind of dictated that whole thing. So you can imagine a lot of farmers did not like, some of the results of those studies. But that's one of the things that we would do. We also had Navy SEALs that would come out and they'd look at optics, like for the Navy, doing research there. So that was in the Gulf of Mexico. I spent about 8 months to a year. Then I came back and I did a master's here in Acadia University out in Halifax. And I looked at marine protected areas with the professor that I was working with. And then after that, we came back here. My wife and I decided, hey, let's live here. We're going to have a family. kids be around the grandparents and stuff, like make sure they're raised by family. And so I've been kind of bouncing around doing private consulting, like with some consulting firms, doing like marine mammal observations up in the Arctic. I've worked in the Atlantic as well. Like I've done work in the Gulf of Mexico here and there over my time. And then I worked for the federal government for a little bit. And during that time, I started to hear from like family and friends asking me questions about the ocean because, I'm the friendly resident marine biologist in Ontario. So people have questions about the oceans and are sharks really like biting everybody and all this kind of stuff. And you answer these types of questions. But then I had a question that it kind of hit me. It triggered me because one of my wife's cousins asked me, he's like, hey, like, is this climate change like a big deal? Like, should we be concerned about it? And I was like, yes, absolutely you should. Like, this is around like, 2009, 2010. I was like, yeah, absolutely you should. And then the BP oil oil spill happened in the Gulf of Mexico. As we all remember, it, blanketed a big part of the ocean. We couldn't cap it. So a lot of oil got out. 11 people unfortunately passed away on that oil rig with the blowout. And we're still paying for it in the Gulf of Mexico today. And I saw a lot of people I looked up to in the science world go down to the Gulf of Mexico. They lived in California, they lived in New York, and they started to go on, like CNN was covering them. They had like, field reporters and like Dr. Jay Nichols and Dr. Carl Safina, Dr. Sylvia Earle. They all went down and they were like they were just videoing themselves, on their phones, and they had little cameras and they were videoing themselves talking about like the tar sand, like the tar balls that were coming up onto the beach. And so it was like, I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like they're just talking about regular science, what we all know, like as scientists, but I'm watching people being like, I had no idea that's what dispersants do. I had no idea. And so that kind of like made the wheel spin. And I was like, I need to help. I need to take part in this. And I was like, I got to start a blog. So I started a blog and I was like, all right, this is fun, but I do not like writing. I learned that pretty quickly. Like writing was not my thing. And so I moved to YouTube videos. And then I spoke to a friend that I used to play football with. And he was like, have you ever tried podcasting? You just have to do audio. You don't have to do video. And I was like, I never thought of that. So I started listening to podcasts and I was like, I could do this. I could so do this. This is my thing. And then I haven't really stopped. And that was in 2015 when I first published. And I haven't stopped since. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So if we could back up for a second, why did you get into being a marine biologist? I know you told me where you went to college, but why did you even make that decision at all?
Like a lot of marine biologists, it was through documentaries. So the Jacques Cousteau documentaries, the Shark Week documentaries when they first started, other like BBC type documentaries, I was just shocked at the beauty of the ocean. So watching these beautiful documentaries, even back then when it was like standard definition, it was the best that we could see. And to see all just like the diversity of animals, not even just the fish. I've always been fascinated with invertebrates. So like the crabs and the little worms, like the flatworms, the nematodes, and the corals and things like that. I've just been fascinated with how the ocean works. And then so since like I was a kid, I've always wanted to do something with the ocean. I didn't know what. And then I found out there's this job called marine biologist. And I was like, all right, I'm in, like pedal to the metal. Let's do whatever I can, to get there. And, did all my math and sciences and everything in high school and was on my way and got into college.
Nice. All right. So you've worked in the Gulf of Mexico, obviously. We'll get to it, I'm sure, more. You did some work in the Arctic and in the Atlantic. Is there any situations that you've had that might have been physically demanding or dangerous situations you found yourself in when you worked in these places?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. A lot of people don't talk about this. It's very dangerous to work on the ocean. So anytime in the field, you have to be very careful. And so when I was in the Gulf, we had a lot of different scientists come on. Some were testing instruments, some were trying out new things. And we had one of the instruments that I controlled. It's called the CTD. So it's conductivity, depth, and temperature meter. And so essentially, if you picture it, it's like this ring of it's like a metal round ring, and it has these bottles. Most of them have bottles. Like we had bottles all along the top, and they could be like 20 liter or 40 liter depending on the size and what you need it for. And then you open them all, and then you had this like data logger on. It's like a little computer on the bottom part of it, and then you had all these instruments that you can add and plug into the data logger. So that can measure temperature, conductivity, which is like if you use an algorithm, it tells you the salinity. You can do phytoplankton, measure phytoplankton through chlorophyll, and you can do all these other things. There's all these different add-ons that you can do. And so we had one where it was on a winch, and then we would put it down. But we had a group that came out, and they were testing this new CTD that they had created. They had something a little different of it, but it wasn't on a winch. You had to put it out by hand. Unfortunately, something broke in it, and the thing just flew down. And you can just see the ropes and the line just go. And like 4 or 5 people, like these are big men, just like grabbing it and just holding on to it. And they wrapped it around like a pipe just to kind of give it a little bit of leverage. And then we started to go, I grabbed it as well. We started to like pull on it, and we're just like, somebody's coordinating us to try and pull it back up. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment that is overboard right now. And if we let go, it could be lost. And so somebody's trying to get something to attach like more of a mechanical winch to it. And, as it started to go, we started to lose grip. People started to let go. I didn't let go. And so I started to move around. It was before the pipe, like it was before it was wrapped around the pipe. I was on the other side of that. And finally someone just grabbed me and just pulled me off. And they were like, you have to let go when everybody says let go. Even if you think you have it, you don't. Like you could have gone overboard just as much. You could have gotten wrapped around. You could have gotten anything. You have to be careful. Like you have to like let us. And it's like, you don't think about it in the moment. And so that was probably one of the things that scared me the most that happened. And after that, I was young. I was in my early 20s. After that, I was like, no, I'm going to be Mr. Occupational Health and Safety on these boats. I'm going to make sure that I know everything. And it kind of helped in a way, because there was one time that was really scary. We were out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico pulling out some instrumentation for a university. I think it was Louisiana State University, LSU. And I opened the engine room because we had some instruments in the engine room. I'm going to check on them, do my regular routine, open up the engine room, and it's just smoke coming in. Now think about this. You're in the middle of the ocean. If nothing's around. You can't see. There's no land. Like you're literally in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And there's just smoke coming out of the engine room. So, alarm goes off, fire. My job, because I was the scientist on the boat, was the liaison between the crew, the crew that we brought out. So our like guests, essentially, these are scientists. My was to get them to the muster station and sit there and wait. We had everybody go down. It ended up being smoke from like the oil line sort of snapped, and oil was going on the engine, like hot engine. So luckily it wasn't too bad, and we were able to stop it before it got worse. But it was just like some of this stuff can happen on the boats, and you have to be aware. Like I always tell people who are early career, it's like occupational health and safety is the biggest thing that you have to know when you're on a boat. Like science aside, like you have to be safe. You cannot do anything if you're in the water and you're a man overboard. It's one of the scariest things to happen in a man overboard. We do the drills, and you see how easy it is to lose somebody in the sunshine, even on the surface of the water, even if they're waving their hands around. It is a scary thing. So yeah. So those are the two things that probably was the most dangerous that I think I've had.
Wow. All right. So on your intake form, you mentioned about it being difficult to get into marine biology. What's up with that? Is there a oversaturation in the market, or what do you got?
You know what? It's a little bit of like oversaturation of the market. More people are going to university, which is great. More people are learning about marine biology, which is wonderful. They're all going for the same jobs, which is reducing in numbers because the funding's getting less. There's not as much funding to sustain all these types of jobs. And a lot of the times, like when you're looking at science jobs, marine biology jobs, you're looking at jobs that a lot of them are maintained by specific funding. I think also I think with every sector across the board, not just marine biology, but every sector, it's difficult because the amount of applicants has increased. And so people are shuffling through, 800 to 900 resumes for a job, whether you're qualified or not. And people are just flying out resumes, whether they are qualified or not. And it's a difficult thing to navigate, because how is somebody supposed to look at 800 resumes? Now they're using computer systems, or sometimes they'll just throw out some of the resumes, like we can only look at the top 100 or the first 100 or the last 100, and whatever they decide, whatever arbitrary metric they decide. So you could be fully qualified for a position. It's almost built for you, or as you think it's built for you. And then you just you just get thrown out of the pile because you came within this certain number and stuff like that. So it
Yeah.
can be difficult in that respect. And then of course it's also, there's a lot of travel involved. So your jobs might not be, I can be in Toronto applying for a job, in California applying for a job in the Maldives or in Australia. That's harder for an employer to be like, oh yeah, you're great for the job, but I don't have the money to pay you to go over, to get your stuff and your family and all that kind of stuff over. You have to do that yourself. And marine biology is not, a tech job. You're not going to get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to go survey sharks and things like that in Australia. And so it's not as, it could be well paying, but it's not as well paying as some of the others to allow you to put up the funds to do the move. Although people do all the time. And they
Let's
try and do
segue
it
into
for-
that. So let's segue in there. So what are we talking for a marine biologist pay? What's about the least you're going to make, and depending on the path you go, where you
Yeah,
might get?
yeah. I mean, there's internships, so we'll take those away because those are internships. But you're looking at starting pay could be, depending where, it could be like $40,000 a year. If you get if you work for government, it's a little bit better laid out. So let's say nonprofit, a lot of the times between 40 and like say 75,000. On a regular, 75,000 is like top jobs. Like sometimes like senior scientist or a director of something like of a certain avenue.
When you say 75,000, are we talking about Canadian dollars or US
You can
dollars?
say US. Let's say US.
Okay. I
Yeah.
can't remember. I'm not sure what the conversion is right now.
It's not very good for Canadians, but yeah, it's much better for the
Okay.
US. But yeah, let's just say US to kind of, so to give everybody an idea. And so yeah, so it's so nonprofit, but a lot of them are in like the 50s and 60s thousands, right? So which is okay, but you're not buying a house in most places on that, depending on where you live. And a lot of times you're living in coastal areas, which are beautiful areas with have housing and beautiful houses and stuff like that are over $1 million. It's difficult to buy a place like that.
Yeah.
You have governments which are a little bit better. A lot of them are unionized, so you get, what pay you're going to get, and you can get stepped up, as you go through. And depending if you're like doing a tech job, like a field work, mostly field work, you're looking at like anywhere from 50,000 to 70 to 75,000 again for tech jobs. But then as you get higher, like PhDs, master's students get a little bit higher. You can get into the 70s and 80s thousands. Administrators, leadership roles can get up to the hundred thousands and above. So it varies depending on the country, but a lot of the federal governments will do that. Provincial governments will be a little bit lower than that, but the governments tend to be able to pay a little bit more from that perspective. Private consulting can really range wherever. It's like, I always say you're an entrepreneur within a consulting firm. You got to fend for yourself. If you bring in clients on your own, you're going to be loved. You're going to be like a leader, and you're going to kind of roll up. The more clients you bring in, the better it is for the organization. The more they'll kind of leave you alone, and the more billable you are. So if you're billable, you're going to do really well. The pay tends to be a little bit better. You're looking at probably like, for starting out, like 60s, and then getting bonuses and things like that to bring you up to like 80s and then as you get higher and higher within that, you can get shares and in the company and stuff like that and get a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah. So, so you mentioned being in the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America. Not whatever.
It's Gulf of Mexico. It's Gulf of Mexico. Everywhere outside of the U.S. is Gulf of Mexico, please.
I don't even know why I brought it up. I'm
That's
sorry.
all good. It's so
But
it's
anyway,
there.
so you're doing experiments, obviously,
Yeah.
but then you have to analyze all this data. So what percentage of the work would you say is actually working on a computer and breaking down data versus working with
But yeah, like
experiments?
especially now when the instruments have gotten so much better that can collect a way more information, the amount of data that we produce or that we have to produce or analyze in the office or in a laboratory is just that much more. So a lot of the times when you're doing fieldwork's expensive. When I was on the boat, at the time we were charging $5,000 a day. It's a lot higher. This is back in the early 2000s. So it's probably a lot higher now. And if you have bigger ships, we were just a 100-foot ship. If you have some of the bigger ships like at Scripps Institute of Oceanography or Woods Hole, you're looking at a lot more to pay for per day. So your field work is like maybe, for each project is usually like 1 or 2 weeks at the most. Sometimes a weekend, sometimes. So like when you're on the field, everything has to be organized, like prepared beforehand. you have to like anticipate problems. And if there are problems, you got to make sure that you get over them pretty quickly in order to get the data that you need, because it costs so much and you only have this span of time for this summer or what have you. You might come back a little later, but you need like this season data, like so spring data versus summer data versus fall data. And sometimes depending on where you live, winter data if you're in like a nicer area like a tropics or something like that. But you need that data. So you have like maybe 1 or 2 weeks depending on your field season or your trip. If you're along the coastal side and you have your own boat and you can go out a little longer. But to be honest, most of the time you're in the office crunching data. You're doing the statistics. A lot of it's just organizing the data, going through it, making sure that it's the right data, making sure that all the decimal points are in place. There's nothing out of line. You're putting Excel tables and and even larger like SQL tables together and learning programming languages and going into stats programs. Like if you've ever spoken to a scientist, you'll hear the word R or R Studio, which is like an open source statistics program, a very good one, but it's like programming, so you have to learn it. And you'll see graduate students, if you ever walk into a science graduate student, doesn't matter like it's physics or anything, they're all using RStudio and they're all cursing at it because if you just talk to them, the amount of eye rolls that you'll get when you mention like how hard was it to learn RStudio, you'll just be like, oh my God, like, are you kidding me? Like that was the bane of my existence in graduate school. We all go through it, but then we all use it after. So, you're working that data and you're putting it into a table that could be read by this program that you can do your statistics and you can analyze it. And then you got to go through the interpretation. Then you got to write up the paper, go through all the references and do all that before you even write the paper. And so it's a lot. And a lot of the times, like here up in Canada and probably like northern US, you're dictated by what is your field season. So early, like maybe mid to late spring, depending on how your winter went, if you can get on a boat, all the way to maybe late fall, again, depending on when the winter comes in. And then in the entire winter, you're just doing data crunching and writing and all that kind of stuff. So it could be like 50-50. It could be, like a 60-40 split. It could be even like an 80-20 split, depending on where you live. I've worked up in the Arctic before, and the field season's not very long because literally everything freezes. Not so much now, but literally everything freezes and it gets dark. I remember starting doing work I was doing marine mammal surveys, and so you're actually binoculars, you're looking out. Well, you can't do that in the dark. And in the summer, it's nice because there's no dark. It goes light all 24 hours a day. But when you get towards September, you go from 24 hours to 8 hours of light per day, pretty quickly. And so you're just like, okay, so this is our field season now. It's like, it's dwindling literally by the light. So it just depends on where you live. But a lot of it is data crunching. That's the important part, is getting the stuff out there. The field stuff is the fun part, is where you see all the videos of everybody out in the ocean and either snorkeling or scuba diving or something like that, or taking like these huge trawl nets and going through fishes and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, you're in the lab and you're in front of a computer and you're crunching numbers and hoping to hell that this interpretation is going to work out for you for a nice paper.
Yeah. Okay. Have you been to, I think it's up by Newfoundland, where the whales come in and then go back? Have you been over there and seen
I've been in Newfoundland. I've seen the whales. I mean, they're all over the place depending on the time of year, right? They migrate up and down the East Coast. So like there's a hill, it's so Newfoundland's a big rock, it's one of our provinces, and it's a beautiful place, but it's literally a rock. So there's a lot of hills. So there's one place called Signa Hill in St. John's, where if you just walk up, you can actually just see the humpback whales just kind of come in, or any other whale depending on the season. But I remember when I was there, I saw the humpback whale just kind of breaching and playing. There was a couple of calves and stuff like that. You get to see that. You get to see the puffins, which are a beautiful seabird. Almost it looks like what's the bird that was it Fruit Loops? The toucan.
Like a toucan.
Kind of looks like a toucan, but like smaller, and it's just a little different.
Yeah,
but
I've seen videos where they launch themselves off of icebergs.
Yes.
Into the water, right?
They're amazing little birds. And there's huge like tourist thing out there, like a tourist attraction out there. And people go see the puffins all the time. But yeah, the whales are just beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a type of person you would say this job probably wouldn't be for?
You have to be adventurous. So if you're not willing to put yourself out there, I mean, the field is, you never know what you're going to come up against, whether you're surveying lakes or surveying, estuaries, which is like where the ocean meets the streams, where you're surveying the ocean, you never know what the elements are going to bring up, and you will have to work in those elements as long as they're safe enough to go out. I've been in tropical storms, just steaming through just to go. You can't work in tropical storms, but we were steaming through just to go pick up other scientists in the Gulf of Mexico. And we're in this like tropical storm where it's on a 100-foot boat where it was difficult to sleep, for like 36 hours, and difficult to even walk because you would like go and the boat would catch air and then it would hit the water
Oh
and
my
you'd
God.
fall. And so you just sit there and you just hope that you can get through it, and everything will be fine. And it's so you just never know what the ocean's going to give you. The one thing that I was always fascinated by and kind of terrified by with these water spouts. You'd have these like little tornadoes of like salt water that are, and you could look at them. You can go out on the stern of the boat and you can see 5 in the area. And as long as they don't come your way, you're okay. But you're kind of at the elements there. You're not going to outrun one if you're close to it or something like that. You never know when they're going to spout up. So it was, it's you have to be adventurous. You have to understand that things can change and be adaptable. You have to be ready that you can go out in the field and all your data could be lost in one shot. You just never know, or like, something hits, like say we get hit by lightning or something, all your computer systems go down, you lose all your data. That could happen. Or like something happens with your computer shuts down, it gets corrupted while you're out in the field, like get some water on it or something like that, and you lose all your data. Like that, you have to be mentally tough in this situation to be adventurous, and understand that you have to be adaptable, but to understand that things happen, and you have to learn to deal with it. Obviously, go through the emotions that you go through losing all your data after like however much it costs, kind of field work season, but also understand that you lost that data, and it'll be difficult to write that up. So you got to be, with that said, you also have to be detail oriented. So you have to understand what is involved and what you could come up with and plan for it beforehand. And that goes with mentoring and stuff like that. But the people who succeed the most tend to be way.
Okay. Maybe you kind of already answered the question then, but so let's say someone just got their degree in marine biology,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're ready to get hired somewhere and get out in the field. Is there any advice you would tell them? Definitely do this or definitely don't do this. Is there anything you might say to that?
I would say definitely network as much as possible. We're lucky now, we're in an age where we can network from your computer at home, on LinkedIn, like get a LinkedIn profile, start reaching out to people, asking what they do for like look up to what people do. And if it interests you, ask them like, hey, I've just graduated from marine biology. I don't if you don't have a plan, like what you want to go into, and start asking around and networking. If you can afford to go to a conference that's either nearby or somewhere you can fly to, that would be great as well. I would even say before you even graduate in college is volunteer with a laboratory. Most professors have their own labs where they have graduate students and so forth. They're always looking for undergraduate students to do some work there. Even afterwards, if you have a good relationship, hopefully you have a good relationship with some of your professors, you can go and be like, hey, I just graduated, looking for a position to learn something, work as a research assistant or something. If you're still local to that university or college, do that. The big thing is get out there and talk to people. And, it's difficult, as I mentioned, it's difficult to get a job when you're just a sheet of paper with your resume on and a cover letter. They don't know who you are. The biggest thing that people want when they hire you is, will you work well with the team that we have? So personality wise, does it jive? And work wise, does it have it work? So if you have the experience beforehand through volunteering through your undergrad, that would be great. Seek out a graduate degree if you want to get a little bit more experience, get more field experience, get more computer experience, like analytical experience and so forth. When you do a master's, it's kind of like somebody gave you a project and you can figure it out, like you can run it. When you do a PhD, is you come up with your own project and you run it. So you kind of like, that's the kind of level. That's how I always been taught about the differences in degrees and where they match up within your like job situation, but also like understand the breadth of what you can do in marine biology. We've talked about a lot of different jobs here. Once you understand, the capabilities of what this job can provide, everybody's different in what they want to do. So go out and try different things, before you really settle on something.
Right.
And I would say try
Okay.
before you go to graduate school, try getting a job. like, and see if you like it. Because if you go to graduate school in something specific, especially now, a lot of people are bypassing the masters to go to PhDs. You become typecasted for that subject because you're the expert in that subject matter. So it's very difficult to get a job in, say, marine mammals when you've done phytoplankton studies in your graduate work, right? So you don't necessarily have the background of understanding marine mammals as much as you would as phytoplankton. So like that'd be the difference.
Okay. It seems like it would probably be difficult to be an expert in multiple areas to truly understand them,
Yeah.
the depth of it.
Yeah, and then when you have a master's, you're kind of a little bit more open. But when you're doing a PhD, you're a little bit more. You're the expert on that particular subject. Nobody's done that. That's why you did the PhD. And so within that line of work, that umbrella, that's where you would most likely qualify for, because you're that expert in that subject. So when you do a PhD, you want to make sure that it's employable afterwards too. A lot of people will do PhDs for the sake of doing PhDs, and they're great to advance science, but can they be employable after? We don't think about that as graduate students. We just think, oh, this is really cool. I'm going to be a doctor after this, and that's really cool. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be applicable to what conservation or science is looking at in the future. Like when I was in graduate school, a lot of the times marine protected areas were big. I started to do on marine protected areas. My professor was nice enough to be like, hey, you should learn GIS as a skill. I went to school for GIS, like a different school before I started my master's, to get my advanced diploma in that. And then I did stuff on marine protected areas where it's a lot of mapping is involved. So GIS is essentially digital mapping. And so I was able to do that in analytics, and I was able to do that through my master's. So when I got out, I could always fall back on the GIS work, whether it's in science or business, if I needed a job, if I was looking for a job. And that has kept me employable for quite some time within science and outside of science. So, having that extra skill set that'll help, like a new set of skill, like a new technology. Like right now, AI is huge. I mentioned before, like learning data or learning to manage the amount of data that's coming through. A lot of time, like machine learning and AI are going to play a huge role in being able to process all of that data. When you're starting to get data come in at a second, every second a piece of data comes in, you have to process that. If you're looking at that type of scale, and without these types of tools, AI and machine learning, you can't do that on your own. You can't do that with just some of these programs that are just built for, they're not built for millions, hundreds of millions of data points. They're built for like maybe a couple 100,000. And so they don't have the capability to process that. So AI and machine learning, I would say, would probably be the way to go. Even like just to give you a little story, like fisheries, international fisheries, overfishing is a huge problem, and people are getting away with not fishing where they're supposed to be, and they'll come in and out of ports really quickly, offload their stuff, and before like the person who's supposed to survey all their stuff, to make sure that it's all on the right side, they're gone. They get their money and they're gone. So they come in and out. And so there's programs now that are using AI and even machine learning to process, like as people sign into, when you come into a port, there's like, you have to sign in and you have to say, this is my boat and this is where I'm from and this is my flag. That goes into a computer system. That computer system now goes into an AI program that surveys where that boat has been in the past, right? Like in the past, like couple of days or the past couple of weeks. And were they flagged over there for illegal fishing, and they just didn't catch them in time? And so if they're coming into this new port, could we catch them and extradite them to that country? And are they doing illegal fishing? If they did illegal fishing before, they're probably doing it again. And so they're using these types of programs to try and track down these vessels that are coming in and out and trying to get in and out at night or things like that.
So what happens if someone they bring a load into a port, and like you said, they're out of there, they leave, but it was an illegal fish? Is the product still, like, they're still going to use the product? Like,
I mean, yeah, that's a good question. That I don't. It depends on the country. It depends on their laws. A lot of times they'll get confiscated. Sometimes they'll go into different programs where they do get used up because the fish are dead. But a lot of times they'll actually take a lot of data on them. What type of fish? They'll do DNA tests, because sometimes these illegal fish come in. They've already been processed at sea. So you don't know. It's really difficult to tell between a tuna and a shark if it's all cut up, and the heads are cut off, the fins are cut off, everything's cut off. and you just see a body. Some experts can be able to tell, some can't, but sometimes you can't. Like the body's so mangled, you don't even know. It's just like cut up into meat, and so it's very difficult to tell between like a shark and a tuna, for instance.
I saw a documentary once, which I really found fascinating. It was about the McDonald's ships, about how they go out and they get the pollock, and the way they just pull them up in these huge nets and they process them. They're frozen and shaped in an hour somehow in the hull of the ship.
Yeah.
They're
giant freezers. They're giant, like, and they'll have these massive boats, and those are like the interesting thing that a lot of people don't know. You think that the boats go out, get the fish, like catch the fish, and they come back to the port and they unload them. That's not always the case. A lot of these fishing boats will go out for years at a time before they come back to a port. What they do is they come up to a ship that actually is a processing ship. And so this ship is usually like a larger ship that has freezers and processors on there and everything like that. And they'll unload, they'll come back to wherever they're from, and they'll come back to that ship and they will offload their catch. So usually they have, like, on those freezer ships, they'll have like fisheries observers and things like that if it's done properly, and they'll kind of take note and take observation of what fish has been caught so that they can know that there's illegal fishing coming on. Again, there's difficulties because sometimes they've already been processed before, so people can't tell. But then what happens is those boats go back out again. So some of those boats don't come back for 7 months, 8 months, a year at a time. And then you wonder, like, how are these people surviving? Like, are they allowed to come off the boats? Are they hurt? Are they sick? They've been out for, you're looking at people from Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines. They're coming from like poorer countries that they're looking to make a living for their families, but they're not coming home at all. And sometimes they don't know this, that they're not coming home. Sometimes there have been documents. There's actually an investigation, journal investigation that just went on, that just got published in the Financial Times, I think, in the UK. They looked at how, I just did a story on this actually, they looked at how brutal the tuna fishing industry is just to catch, like, just how, so a guy went out for 7 months, came back, he can barely walk, he can barely talk, just because of the sickness that he had and how he got hurt and stuff like that. And he says a lot of times when you're on the ship, they take your passport, so you can't get off the ship. They don't feed you properly. They don't, like, it's basically like modern day slavery, like fishery slavery. And there have been times, as gross as this is, there have been times where if people are too sick to work, they'll just throw them overboard. Nobody knows. They're not documented on there. They're just, because nobody knows that they're there, and nobody knows that they're gone, because who's going to catch them? We've had, maybe 10 years ago, I did a story on like when I first started the podcast, I did a story on a fisheries observer from the US that was working down in South America. He disappeared. Nobody knows where he went. He was on a boat one time, came back. Nobody knows where he went. And he was documenting a lot of the illegal stuff that was going on, and the FBI got involved, but I don't think they ever solved the disappearance. So they don't know if it was a murder. They suspected it was a murder. They suspect that he was just, thrown overboard in that kind of case. And so it could be overfishing we're starting to realize that although we're starting to get better in the transparency with all these different fishings, like McDonald's, for instance, like when they look at their pollock, their supply chain is like tracked all the way, and so their fish is actually sustainably caught, or considered sustainably caught, through a lot of certification processes. But some of them aren't. And there are times, not just McDonald's, like some of these supply chains aren't tracked, and it can turn into like fisheries fraud at the supermarket, where you think you're eating one fish but you're not eating the right fish. And they found out that, like, Oceana did a study a number of years ago. They found out like 48% of the fish that they surveyed in these supermarkets were fraudulent. They were not the fish that you actually expected. Yep. It's like number. That's a big number. Yeah. And these were like major ones in like the US and Canada. Yeah.
So I'm going to assume these are more of your processed fish, like fish sticks and other types of fish where there's a
not necessarily. They looked at fisheries markets where they actually look at fillets, and one of them they thought it was tuna, and it ended up being like processed, like a shark that was known for having carcinogens, and a lot of the white fish was actually just tilapia, aquaculture tilapia, because that's easier to do. So they're selling like sea bass as tilapia, and they're selling it for the sea bass price. But a lot of the supermarkets didn't know, because they don't, there's so many people in the middle that are that are like changing things in the middle, that you don't know where everything goes. A lot of times, there was a story out of North Carolina where the fishing community would, like they would get shrimp and they would get flounder and stuff like that. And when they processed and they sold it to like this business person, they had no idea where it went after that. Like they had no clue where it was going. And a lot of these fishing communities have pride in what they sell and what they catch and what they sell. They want people to benefit from. But a lot of the stuff that was going would go outside their community. So it wasn't going in the fishing community in North Carolina. So they're starting to see like fish catches. They're like, what do they call it? Fish stock catches, where it's like you can pay a certain amount per year, like locally, and like pay into these catch shares. That's what they're called. They're catch shares. And you pay into this, like it's almost like an investment, so that when they go out, you get a portion of their catch. And so locally, you know what they're eating, you know who's catching it and who's eating it, who's buying your stuff, so that there's more of a community feel and there's more of a support for these fishers and these fishing communities, because they're actually supplying the fish and seafood to the communities. And so there's a bit more of that community drive. Like you get to know the person who's catching your food and all that kind of stuff. And now we're seeing it in Canada. There's outfits like in the Pacific. You can say, I want such and such a fish and such a fish, and somebody will go out and grab it. And so they're not overfishing. They're not trying to catch as many as possible. They're trying to catch a certain amount. You pay a little bit more of a premium, but you know where the fish is coming from. You know, you have a profile of who caught it for you and their families and everything like that, and how long they've been fishing and all that. And it comes to your door, and like it's flash frozen, but it comes to your door and you can just have it as you will. So there's a lot, there's better mechanisms in like developing countries, but a lot of overfishing is transparency is bad. Now we're starting to realize like the not even realize, but we're starting to crack down more on the human rights aspect of catching these fishes, and some of these like longer haul type of catches where you have to go further out and stay out there for a longer time.
Yeah. So you're talking about overfishing. You're talking. We know that there's pollutants in a lot of the fish.
Yeah,
It makes me wonder: do you eat fish?
I do. I do eat fish. And I don't eat fish a lot. It's a difficult thing for me to go back and forth. One, I try, like my goal is to eat stuff that's sustainably caught. And even with that, as an individual who is trying to do the right thing, it can be difficult. Because I've gone to restaurants and they'll be like, okay, here's this like black cod, which is delicious. Where'd you catch it? How was it caught? And the waiter's just like, I have no idea. Can you ask the chef? Some of the chefs will be like, yeah, actually, we caught this. We're part of this program, Seafood Watch, or we're part of, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. So this is where it was caught. This is how it was caught. It's on the green list of this certification program, this kind of stuff. And then you're like, all right, cool. Like, this is great. That's when you know you're at a good restaurant. A lot of these other restaurants that are family run, where you have people coming in, the waiters are, they're not involved in what the food is. They're just selling the food. They're just bringing the food out to you. The chefs are not necessarily involved in where it's caught, or they don't have a say in where it's caught, because maybe it's like hugely franchised or something like that, and they're not part of these programs. And so they'll just be like, I have no idea. And you're like, okay, cool. Well, I'm not going to eat that fish because you don't have an idea. Like, this is nothing against you, but I can't in good conscience eat this fish not knowing where it was caught and how it was caught. Right. And that's a big deal for me. So I don't eat a lot of fish because of that. There's a lot of places where, where they just don't know. You would be surprised. Like, you can look up like McDonald's and things like that, because they have that documented, even though the employees won't have it. But if you go and you do your due diligence, you can do that. It's not easy. There's apps, so that you go Seafood Watch, you can look at apps, and they're very conservative in what they do. So if you want to do that, then yeah, be conservative and you go out and do your thing. And I applaud that, just ask questions, but also eat a diversity of fish. Here in Canada, it's almost like we feel like we only have salmon and sometimes cod or haddock or halibut, but there's so many other fish that we could be eating, this diversity that would not affect the rest of the population if you start eating a diverse amounts, but we just don't have the taste buds for it. You know what I mean? Like, we haven't been given a lot. Like, there's a lot of fresh fish that come out of Great Lakes, but they're hard to find. And so, like, unless you catch them yourself, but there's not a big market for it. And we're not like given that. There's not, salmon's huge here, haddock and halibut and cod, obviously not as much as cod as we used to have, because we overfish them. And so, it's a matter of like understanding how these seafood apps work, making sure that they're sustainable. And if you have any questions or you have any doubts, just refuse.
So when I go to the store and I want to buy a fish, I'm assuming there's some sort of labeling that might indicate this.
Yeah. So there's certain stores that will go through a labeling process. Marine Stewardship Council is probably the most well-known Costco will follow the marine stewardship certification process, so they should have the label. I'll send you what the label looks like if you want for your viewers. But
We'll
there
put it
is a
on the
label,
screen.
like
Yeah.
yeah, there's like a
Yep.
blue label for it,
Okay.
and so that's it's part of that certification process. Is it perfect? No. But is it better than what it was? Yes. And like the whole point of Marine Stewardship Council is to look at the supply chain and to track where it goes. So we know that it is that fish, one, and we know that it is continuing to be sustainable, and that, and now they're starting to look at like how are people treated and things like that.
Okay. Let me ask you a little bit of a bigger question. Everything you talked about is trying to protect the fisheries, trying to not overfish, but we've got the pollution going on with it. Here's my question: Are we is this are we cooked? Like, is it over? And we're just going through the death throes. Like, we're ultimately just we're going to kill the whole thing. It's just a matter of time.
That's one way of looking at it. I work more on hope that we will do better. It doesn't look good. There's a lot of things going on. So the major things we've talked, like overfishing, microplastics, other water pollution like like nutrients, over nutrients, and just chemicals in the water, which are more local. Climate change, which it makes everything worse, right? The hope that I get is that you see people more and more wanting to like asking for change. The pessimism in me comes from meetings like the COP30 that just happened, where there's still no text about like phasing out fossil fuels. That is the major contributor to climate change. We are still seeing people in power all over the world that are, even here in Canada, we've just announced building pipelines, which we were supposed to get away from. We're supposed to move away from, all these things, taking away emission caps from Alberta, which have the tar sands, which they want because they want to produce more, because our economy has changed because of other world politics that have changed our economy, from our neighbors down south. And so things have changed. And when we see this change, there's this thought process of that if we want the economy to do well in each country, the environment has to suffer. But if you look at a lot of the change that happened, a lot of the disasters that have been caused by climate change cost money to clean up. Wildfires, hurricane damages, cyclone, typhoons, like all over the world, droughts. These are costing us all money. And I haven't seen a really good picture of how much we're paying in the damages and how much we're making from all these, like our economy. And if that equals out, or if there's one that kind of goes up and down. And so I look at the hope of the people that want better for their kids, for the next generations. I worry about the people we keep voting in each and every country, and the fact that we're not taking this seriously. And that is a serious thing to do. Will we be around in 50 years? Absolutely. Will the human race last 50 years, 100 years? Yeah, absolutely. Are we killing our planet? Yes, we are. We're doing it to ourselves. The evidence is out there. It needs to be better. Are there programs that can work to help, and are they being implemented? In some cases, yes. We're getting better with fisheries tracking. We're understanding what's happening more through technology, through satellite imagery and tracking and monitoring. We're starting to understand that a little bit more, and we have a lot of work to do within that to get it better. We have to act faster. In some cases, we're regressing instead of acting. So a lot of people will be like, well, what do you think of this, the latest announcements of such and such country about, oil and gas and this and that? And you're just like, I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised. And then people are like, well, how do you manage the economy? I'm like, I'm not an economist. But I would like the economists to start talking more about the environment and how we can benefit with a great environment and a great economy. There's got to be a way. It can't be one or the other. So I think that conversation has to change before we start getting more optimistic about the future of our planet.
How about telling us what is the best day you've ever had on the job, or perhaps the worst?
The best day I've ever had on the job is being out in the field, and anytime there's a sunset or a sunrise, and I've been up for it. Nothing beats it. When you just have ocean and you have a sunrise, nothing beats it. There was actually one time where I was out in the Arctic, and we were kind of off. Like I was a private consultant. I was doing a marine mammal observation. So we were looking at bowhead whales, and there were seals that come up to the boat, and all our instrumentation was off. So we were just kind of we were taking a break, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. I was on shift, and this is the point, just around the point where the sun dips right over the horizon. It's still light outside, but you don't see the sun for like maybe a couple of minutes. And then as that was rising, you see the oranges and the colors change, of course. And all of a sudden, this whale, this bowhead whale, is like right beside our boat, just kind of comes up and then down, and it's fluke, its tail just, sees full tail and just comes in. No words were spoken. I'm on the bridge of the ship. There's probably about 10 people on the ship. Now I'm on a ship it's kind of cool. It was a Chinese ship. So most of the officers and the people who were on the deck were all Chinese speaking. We could not communicate. I do not speak Mandarin. Like, we weren't communicating other than like kind of like giggling and laughing and writing stuff down and drawing pictures to kind of communicate to each other. Great crew. They were really fun. Everybody saw that. Nobody spoke a word, but we just kind of looked around being like, that was awesome. Like, just understand, like a full understanding. We couldn't communicate to each other, but it was just, there's the background, the sun, nothing else but ocean, and this whale just pops up beside our boat, not saying a word. All you heard is like the blow, from its breath out, from its exhale and inhale, and you're just like, that was one of the greatest moments of my life. Like, just to see that, and you realize how beautiful the ocean is. Like, you really truly understand, and you just feel it, and you're just like, this is worth it. It's worth all the storms. It's worth all the bad wave days, and where you can barely walk because you're like kind of wobbling in and out, and you just see it's dead calm. Whale pops up, you see everything, and you're just like, that was awesome. Yeah.
Very cool. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. If you won the lottery tomorrow, would you still do this job?
100%. Like, that's the dream, because then you can do any study you want, right? It's not about buying like super yachts or buying like all these different types of clothes. It's like, can I create an organization that can go out and do some good? Like, that's the dream for every marine biologist that's out there, that's listening to this, or listening to this episode, or listening to me on my podcast. It's, if you can win the lottery, it's like, how are you going to spend it in marine biology? A lot of the times you'll hear, because marine biology is, I feel like it's different from a lot of other sectors in that we will do this stuff for free. Like, I've heard that said. I've said it in my lifetime, especially as a young scientist. And people will take advantage of it. They're like, oh, you're going to do it for free? Like, come on. Yeah, do it for free. But we will also, like, we live and breathe it. And it's you see a lot of people burning out because of that. We talk about it all the time. You talk about the ocean, you think about the ocean all the time. You think about the studies that you can do. There's no 9 to 5 because your schedule's all over the place with field seasons and things like that. And so I have friends that are in marine biology. Like, when we get on, like, we'll talk about other stuff, but a lot of the times it's like, what's going on in the industry? Like, so-and-so did this type of study, and so hurt himself or hurt herself or hurt themselves when they're out on the boat, and they're fine now. But it's always constantly doing the job. And you get a lot of people who burn out because of it, because that's all they think they need to do. But it's a very different job in that respect, because there's this passion behind it. We don't get paid a lot, but we enjoy the experiences that we have. And if we can have like a peer-reviewed paper that could change something, change a policy, change the way people view things. If we can have a podcast that can do the same thing, that makes it all the worthwhile.
Okay, what would you say your hot take is? Something that a lot of other marine biologists would disagree.
I would say that true science is not publishing in a primary journal that gets reviewed and that nobody sees. It's communicating to the public. That's true science. That's doing the real work. We have long been in a system where it's not necessarily anybody's fault, like scientists' fault, but scientists, if you want to be successful, you have to publish a lot of papers, especially the academics, the people who are doing, even nonprofits. If you get a peer-reviewed science paper in a journal, like Science or Nature or any other journal that has like a high rating, that is like, you've done well. That's your product. That's how people, like, if you want to go to another university, like how many articles have you published? Like, even coming out of a PhD, you need to have, and if you want to go to a job, they're looking, well, have you published like, 10 articles? like how often before, like 20 years ago, it was like you didn't have any because you barely had it because you just came out of graduate school. Now it's like you're publishing all the time. It's a publish or perish kind of system. And that's how they judge. Like, I've had a great career. I've had this many published, and then this many times, like, people have cited my work in these published papers. But the real work is like, we need to talk to people. There's this thought that, a lot of people have, that scientists are elitist, that they look down on people, that they know more than everybody. And people get mad at the scientists for that. You look at the regular marine biologist, we are just regular people. We don't get paid a lot. We're not made of money. We like to be on the ocean. We like to look at whales, and we like to look at dolphins, and we like to dive on coral reefs and all that kind of stuff. And we like statistics, and we're geeky and all that kind of stuff, but we're just like everybody else. And to be able to talk to people through a lot of the social media channels that we have, public meetings at schools, we need to show people that we are just regular people who are just passionate about a particular part of our planet, which is that covers 71% of our planet, and to be able to do that, we need to speak more to the public, and we need to engage more with the public. So having this great, which is great for your career, doesn't mean you're a successful scientist until you start to get out into the public and talk about your work in regular fashion. No jargon, no acronyms. Have a conversation with somebody, and give your opinion. And there's a lot of understanding. Like, we will publish on something, but we understand that the world is complex. We understand that politicians will be politicians, and we understand that business people will be business people. But there's this, when you start to have conversations with scientists, and you start to have an understanding of where we're coming from, and understanding where the business sector is coming from, industry sector is coming from, there's ways that we can compromise, and we can come up with a way to actually do better for our planet. And I think that's an important aspect to what we need to do. So yes, you need to do stuff to be successful in your career, and you're evaluated on those things, but talk about it in the public. Science communication was not a thing in the 90s or before. We didn't really talk to the public. We had a few people, the Cousteaus, who wasn't really a scientist. He was more of an explorer. David Suzuki here in Canada, Dr. Sylvia Earle, who's a great spokesperson for the ocean and for the planet. But those were sort of the few that got to speak about, and they had their own, people, in science kind of shunned them a little bit because they weren't doing science work, and they're doing more advocacy work. But we're starting to see more and more people now do the advocacy work. Younger generations using social media as a regular part, almost as like an extra limb, is their phone, right? And they're starting to use it. They're starting to talk on their phone. They're starting to share their work, the good, the bad, the ugly of their jobs. And people are starting to get to know them a little bit more. And that's why I started my podcast, is to get people to get to know that these are people just like you and I that are just trying to do something that they're passionate about. It just happens to cover 71% of the planet and have a big effect. Yeah. It's really interesting, Shane, like, you go to Climate Week New York. Have you heard of that? Like, it's like a big thing that a lot of people will go. That's another problem where people aren't hearing about Climate Week New York or Climate Week Toronto. The ocean was barely talked about, right? And the ocean is responsible for every second breath that we take. Every second breath that we take, the oxygen is produced by the ocean. And think about, how is oxygen produced? By photosynthesis. Through all those, remember at the beginning of the show, I talked about those phytoplankton. It's these photosynthesis. They take carbon dioxide in and shoot out oxygen. So think about, as a medium that covers 71% of our planet, where there's phytoplankton in every body of water, like tons, and I mean like tons and tons, and we need to protect that. And we need to talk about that because we rely on it, but we're not talking about it in climate change like meetings. Or like, it's a lower end priority, even though it's some of the biggest. We'll talk about deforestation, which is important. We'll talk about forests, how important they are. But like, if you think about like a tree, a lot of times when you compare a tree to like a mangrove or seagrasses, those seagrasses and mangroves and kelp, they actually take up more carbon, like 4 to 10 times more carbon dioxide than a tree. Yet we're not talking about them. People don't talk about seagrasses. People don't talk about mangroves. They just see it as seaweed. Seagrasses are known as seaweed. It's not seaweed. It's a very productive part of our coastal system. And we need to talk more about that. We need to learn more about that.
So we hear about ocean acidification. Mm-hmm. Is that the connection there, that as it gets more acidic, that we get less of that oxygen coming back towards us, and that at some point it might be so acidic we're done for. Uh, that's
Not
what some I've
necessarily.
heard that.
Yeah,
So
it's more of so if you think about when we talk about ocean acidification, we think about there's more carbon in the ocean, right? And so it has to do like a lot of the shells and a lot of how animals are built, like corals, they're built through limestone, so bicarbonate. And so they build it through the bicarbonate that's available through sort of the regular oceanographic processes, right? But if you have more carbon dioxide in the ocean, that will bind with the calcium. So bicarbonate is a product of calcium, right? So when the CO2 is binding with the calcium, you have less carbonate. So that means coral reefs cannot build their skeletons, right? You have oysters cannot build their skeletons. You have like mussels and clams, they cannot build their skeletons. You have less of that available. So you're having actual food and habitats that we rely on for food as well as for coral reefs. We rely on it for security of our coastlines because it decreases wave energy when we have big waves, so it decreases erosion along our shorelines. Those habitats and those animals are slowly degrading away because they just can't build their shells enough. So that's what we're talking about, ocean acidification. So the more carbon dioxide that's available, that's not getting absorbed by the ocean, but that's available in the ocean, is binding with the calcium that will eventually build those limestone shells up and skeletons up.
tell us about your crowdfunding for the Seagrass podcast, Speak Up
Yeah.
for Blue Network.
Yeah, like as I mentioned, we don't talk about this type of habitat enough. It is seagrasses are responsible. Seagrass meadows are responsible for most of our diversity. We talk a lot about the diversity of that is on coral reefs, but seagrasses produce actually more biodiversity within that area. It's a nursery area for a lot of young fish and invertebrates to kind of feed and grow, and so that they can go to coral reefs, so they can go to other habitats. They can provide food for us. They solidify the sediment, and so they kind of bind it together. So with seagrass meadows, it helps protect from erosion and so forth. But they're also facing a lot of problems. They're being taken up, dredged out. They're being anchors that get put on, they kind of drag around, and they kind of they kind of take it up out of the ocean. We're getting less carbon dioxide sequestered from these plants because they are plants. You're getting less biodiversity. It cleans the water. It takes nutrients right out of the water, so it cleans the water, better water quality. And so we're seeing a lot of research being done but not shared. So the purpose of this podcast and the purpose of why I start these podcasts is, one, to share the research and information not only to the public but also to other marine biologists that are out there. That's the goal, because it can be very disconnected around the world. There are people who are doing really great work on the same type of habitat, but they don't know about each other. They don't know necessarily about the research. So the idea is, if they listen to a podcast like this, or if they're on a podcast and they share it with their friends and their colleagues, then we can get them more to kind of understand what's happening, and have that awareness of what type of work's been done. So hopefully foster more collaboration. But the big thing too is that as people crowdfund this, one of the big things, we talk about the information, like the science, the conservation, the restoration projects that are going on. But also, if somebody crowdfunds this, they will be contributing to restoration of a particular seagrass site that will benefit that coastal area. So I'll be documenting it all throughout that process, throughout the podcast, as well as behind the scenes too. And people can get access to that and understand, like, them just listening to the podcast and supporting the podcast helps restore seagrass projects around the world.
All right. Well, I'll definitely have a link to it in the show notes. What about your job posting platform? Does that have to do with marine biology, or is that just in general, or what is that?
No, it's a marine biology project. So again, the people are having trouble finding jobs to apply for, understanding how to apply for jobs. It's not necessarily taught at colleges, universities, graduate students. You can go to a lot of universities will have like career centers, and they'll tell you how to apply to general jobs. They don't always have like somebody for the environment or something like that. So a lot of people who've been working within the industry for a long time, who've applied to jobs, who've had successes, who've had misses, and have had to learn throughout that process, have been teaching people how to do this. So this is it starts off as a job posting platform of jobs that I kind of curate and find that I think are interesting that people can apply to, and get like a breadth of types of jobs that you can work in. So it could be anywhere working for different sectors, but it could also just be doing things that you wouldn't have expected. So it could be like, working in fundraising, or working in communications, or working as a marine biologist at an institute, or at a yeah, professor, things like that. So it's all the different types of jobs that you can do and that are available. But the other side of it is that I'm building out a platform to actually build your resume, and like save little snippets of those resumes using AI, and just kind of like piecing it together. And so you can build the like more purposeful cover letters and resumes for that job, and curate it for that job. Have a course to like understand the job process and the application process as I learned it from other people, so that people can just kind of get access to it, and help their career and advance their career. So it's not just like getting that first job, but it's also understanding how to pivot and getting different types of jobs. So this starts off as job posting, getting people on the site, but then offering other things that they need based off of feedback.
Yeah. I'm curious, would you allow all jobs on there referencing marine biology? And an example I'm thinking of in my head is, what if Exxon is hiring a marine biologist, and essentially it's going to be to refute climate change and other things like that?
Yeah,
Would
no,
you
that's a no.
not going
That's
to
a,
make it?
that's a no. No, exactly. And to be honest though, there are places that will, like Indeed and stuff like that, will post that, and we're at a point where some people will like, well, it's a job. I need to get paid for it. And it's not to say that they're choosing the wrong thing. They're surviving. And I think that's, in a world we live in today where there's a high cost of living, groceries are high, it's difficult. I don't want to judge people for taking jobs like that, but I want to offer people the best chance of getting different jobs, and understanding what's available and working with them. I've done a lot of calls where I've worked one on one with people, where it's just like, what would you like? And trying to help them define what they would like. Because there's like, oh, I want to work with sharks. Well, how do you want to work with sharks? There's so many different ways you can work. So let's define this, and let's start taking a few jobs. Because like when I started, I did the same thing. I just want to work in marine biology. I don't know what I want to do. I applied for, I think it was 400 different job ads when I first started. I spent 6 months applying for four, and I like stuff I didn't out Shane, I wasn't even closely qualified for. Like it was bad. And like I'd have templates of cover letters that just didn't work, or had misspellings. So I'm trying to apply for so many. And then someone took me aside and was like, you need to focus on a specific type of job that you want. Like curtail to that, start networking within that niche, and start to apply to those more purposefully. And I started to get more interviews from it, because I was actually working within that. I had a background in that, and it was helping me within that. So it's just trying to get people to like take a breath, like take that passion and like filter it into a way of, let's be purposeful with what type of job you want, and just understand that just saying that you want to help the ocean, or you want to help a specific species or a coral reef or something, doesn't mean you will belong in that. And you might end up getting something different based on interest, or based on availability of jobs around you, or where you can live, or where you can go. Can't work in every country. There's visas, and there's a lot of stuff that happens, and you can't work in every different province or state or wherever. So there's a lot of like personal things that you need to go through to understand, this is where I can work. This is the type of work that I would like to work in, but it might need to be filtered through some life caveats. Like for me, I never lived along a coast, because my wife, to be at that time now, my wife of 20 years, we came to an understanding that we wanted to have our kids grow up around family. And so that's in Ontario. Well, it's difficult to be a marine biologist in Ontario. So I had to take some hits in my career, and understand that my career may not have been when I first started, but that was my personal choice to take that. And some people are willing to go and travel for their job, and that's great. And I'll help people do that. And others have to understand the different sacrifices that makes, and then the sacrifice that they have to make, whether it's career to live in a specific place, or family, like sacrifice time with family because you're living abroad. So it all just depends.
Interesting. Oh, yeah. Well, that sounds very useful to
Yeah,
marine
thank you.
biologists. Okay. New segment. This is the overrated, underrated segment. You're the
Okay.
first to ever do this. We'll just go through it really fast. You tell me
Yeah.
overrated or underrated. Throw in some more details if you want, but here we go. Overrated or underrated? Shark Week,
Overrated.
dolphin
Insane.
therapy,
Overrated because they're captive. I don't like captive dolphins.
Scuba certification.
Underrated. It's awesome. Do it.
Grant writing.
Underrated. It's essential. Yeah, I talked about funding. It's essential. Underrated.
Nice. The movie Jaws.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to say underrated, but there's a caveat to that. And I know this is a quick segment, but I'm going to tell you a little story. I have another podcast called Beyond Jaws podcast, apart from How to Protect the Ocean podcast. But Beyond Jaws podcast, I co-host it with a friend of mine who's a guy who's been in shark science for over 40 years, Dr. David Ebert. He's known as a lost shark guy. He would be a great guy to get on the podcast, by the way.
Love to have him.
He told me about Jaws because he considers him and his colleagues as part of the Jaws generation. And what he meant by that is that when Jaws came out in the late 70s, he was like, a young student at that point. And when Jaws came out, everybody was freaking out about these great white sharks. Nobody knew about them. Now this thing is like hunting people in this movie and all this kind of stuff. And so what happened was a lot of governments were like, we have great white sharks on our coast. We need to find out more. It actually generated more funding to learn about sharks. And it actually really started, that you can argue that started the shark science field. It was there, but not as prolific as it is now. And with that said, with a couple of like different, in states, especially with a couple of different legislations that help protect sea lions and help protect sharks and so forth, now like great white sharks are one of the biggest conservation success stories in US history on the West Coast and on the East Coast. And so that's why I say it's underrated. Although it did give sharks a bad reputation because it was a horror movie, it also proliferated the shark science world that we see today. So I would say underrated for that.
So, okay. So we got it as underrated, but so you're saying Jaws helped us understand sharks better.
Yeah.
Free
'cause
Willy.
it funded more science.
So Free Willy we got for whales. What movie needs to be made about what marine animal that would help that animal that's not on our radar that much?
That's not on the radar as much.
Yeah, we don't think about because there's no movie.
I would say a movie about sea turtles. I was going to say polar bear because of the climate change and what it does for climate change. One of those two species. They're both iconic. People love them. People love to see them. But the sea turtles will go to different habitats and we know they travel along. Like the first ever sea turtle that was tagged went from Baja California to Japan. And we didn't know they traveled that far. Right. And so that was Wallace J. Nichols that was part of that study. And, having like sea turtles, which are so beautiful, we know that from Finding Nemo, they had that cool kind of surfer kind of attitude. So people love sea turtles. They're gentle. They don't harm humans. And the fact that they're actually doing green sea turtles were actually delisted from endangered to like least vulnerables. There's actually conservation success around that. I think having a movie about sea turtles would be great. I think it would really help people like love the ocean again and not worry about sea turtles killing anybody because there's never been a killing of sea turtles.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, just a viral video like the plastic straw and the sea turtle kind of catapulted, plastic straws being banned in a lot of places. So, and single-use plastics being banned.
Well, that was the next question on the overrated, underrated plastic straw bans.
So a lot of people say they're overrated because people are like, why should we care about a plastic straw? I would say they're underrated because I feel like looking at plastic straws in that viral video that we just discussed, it's like the gateway to all the other single-use plastics if it's done right. If you just do plastic straws, there's problems because there's problems with like there's a certain group of people who have certain like disabilities, we'll call them, that they need to use plastic straws to drink. So there's that aspect, and people are just sick of talking about plastic straws. We know that, from top government to down to like the common person like myself, people are sick of talking about it. But if you educate the people right, and you use legislation to use that as a gateway to other single-use plastics, that makes a big deal. And the story about that sea turtle that was in Costa Rica, a friend of mine did that. I interviewed him after that viral video went viral, or that video went viral. 4 months later, because I asked him during the interview, I'm like, what are the odds of finding a straw, like a plastic straw in a sea turtle? And he's like, I don't know, like it's never happened before. I've never heard of it. I've never seen it. So let's say 1,000,000 to 1. 4 months later, He's down about 70 kilometers south of where he was in Costa Rica. He's doing research on sea turtles, and somebody comes up. It's like a big sea turtle nesting season, so all these olive ridley sea turtles are coming to the beach, and he's he's looking at the sea turtle shells and stuff like that, doing his research. Somebody comes up to him, a tourist, and was like, "Hey, are you a scientist?" Like, yeah. He's like, "There's something wrong with this turtle over here." So they walk over, they see the turtle, and they see there's something stuck in his nose. So he's like, "What is this? Is this another plastic straw? Like, that's incredible." So he films it again because he's like, "We got to get this on tape because like this just happened 4 months ago." And he starts pulling it out, and he pulls it out. It's a plastic fork, that got stuck within the thing. And he says olive ridleys are more prone to it because they're more experimental in their food. And if you see like a plastic straw, if you picture it in a fork, after it's been degraded within the ocean, it probably looks like a little bit more like a hook. Yeah, and so it kind of looks like a shrimp, and olive ridleys are omnivores, so they'll eat shrimp. So they probably tried to get it. They probably tried to swallow it, realized that it wasn't food, tried to cough it up, and it went right into its nasal passage and got stuck there. So the fact is like it's not just plastic straws that are getting stuck in the noses of sea turtles, it's other things as well, and we just don't know what other things. We're just seeing two of those. So the plastic straws is a gateway to more of a single-use plastic problem and a plastic problem in general. So if it's educated properly, it's underrated, but just single-use plastics alone, overrated. So I'm kind of like back and forth.
Gotcha. All right. Overrated, underrated. Tenured professor.
This might be a hot take. I'm gonna say underrated. I don't think any position should be guaranteed as like a tenured professor is. It's hard to get tenure, but I do feel that people who do research on anything like science related, evolution, ecology, whether it has to do to practicality, to conservation or protecting, I think it's important to have tenured professors to feel safe within that because it's not always coming back as a moneymaker for the university. It's just more, putting that thought process in and helping us understand the world a little bit better. So having that safety is really important. But a lot of universities use it for different reasons. If you don't bring in money for the university through grants or even just like you make a product, a lot of them are like, "Hey, make a product and we'll get money." Then the tenured professor is underrated because that's what it's used for, is to put more towards making money for the university by selling products or services rather than, advancing science. So it depends, but I would say more underrated.
All right. Commercial fishing.
I'm going to say overrated at the industrialized level, underrated at the artisanal level. So local fishers.
Okay. Save the turtles bracelets.
Underrated. If the bracelets are made properly. I have 2 of them on right now, not just Save the Turtle. There's a company, I'm going to shut them out. I'm not sponsored by them. Would love to be sponsored by them, called Follow. It's FAHLO. And you buy these bracelets. So I actually have a sea turtle bracelet right here. I'm not sure if you can see if I put it up to the camera. Sea turtle bracelet. Yeah. They work with organizations who tag the animals. So they do land and so anything from sea turtles to gorillas. They do all this to sloths. Believe it or not, sloths get tagged and they follow them. I don't know how far they go, but they follow them.
How do they lose them?
Yeah, exactly. How do they lose them? They can just walk and walk with them. But then it's attached to an app. So you get this bracelet as a kind of like a reminder. You get this profile of this animal and they name the animal and everything. And then you go on their app and they track it. And you can like see where the animal's been and how it's been. So they have penguins. So you can actually see the penguin go from its nest all the way to get some food where they go and then come back. And then they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. You see whale sharks. You see, like I said, gorillas, giraffes, lions, dolphins, sharks, like all this stuff. And when the tag pops off, because as it will eventually pop off, you don't have to buy a new bracelet to get a new animal. They just give you a new animal to follow. So, and it tells you how many people have followed and how many people. And so a portion of the proceeds go towards those organizations that are tagging those animals. So yes, sea turtle bracelets, it brings about awareness. It makes you feel like you're part of studies. You can support studies. Highly underrated.
I didn't know anything about that. That's pretty cool. All right. Overrated, underrated, field work.
I think more people should go on field work trips. Like people who aren't scientists, connect with the ocean, get to see what we get to see each and every day, the good and the bad. Right? Like, seeing a sea turtle with that you're surveying and you see a straw stuck in its nose, or you see that it's had a fin chopped off, come across a shark that has been finned out in the ocean and is still breathing but it has no fins and is suffering. That's the bad part. Seeing the beautiful, the sunsets, the ocean, being out, smelling the ocean, being out on on the water and understanding all the different parts and seeing dolphins like come up on by your boat and bow ride your boat on a daily basis is ultimate like connection with the ocean. And so highly underrated. And I think more people should actually take part. Scientists should be taking people on these fields and get them involved. It's so much fun.
Well, that's the end of our speed. So I don't think I'm going to have to call it a speed session
Yeah,
anymore.
I've talked too much for that.
It's all right. That was cool. All right. All right, Andrew, last question for you.
Yes.
What is a secret that most people do not know about this career?
Understanding that your path is not direct. Like it's not, you go to school, like you fall in love with the ocean, you go to school for it, you go to graduate school and you get a job right out and you're in that job for the rest of your life. It's not how it works. You can meander back and forth. Like I will get a job in marine biology again where I'll get paid for that. Just the time is not now. Right. And I've got other priorities. I got putting kids through, I got to pay my bills, pay my mortgage, putting my kids through university. That's the priority right now. Understand you can go back and forth and everybody's done it. You know, they look at scientists who have been doing it for, 40, 50 years and like, oh, they just got a job right out of the gate. No, that never happened. It may have happened to a few. It's like when you see superstars, like Hollywood stars, and you see they've all of a sudden popped on and people are like, oh man, I want to have that career, like the Kevin Hart career. Well, yeah, but you don't hear about the years, unless you hear from Kevin Hart himself, you don't hear about the 10 to 20 years where he lived out of his car, or, he went through hardships and he didn't have the money he has now or the fame that he has now. It's the same thing. Like you didn't hear about the scientist who has like 40 or 1,000 published papers, but also he had to open up an aquaculture facility because that's how he got paid. Or he had to go out and work as a salesperson for a company because he couldn't find a job in ocean conservation because there's no funding. Like you don't hear about that because we don't talk about it, but more and more people are talking about it now. We're getting more people. The Beyond Jaws podcast that's exactly what that is. We follow the career of different shark scientists and we show what their careers actually was. They're super honest. They're super transparent. And they're like, yeah, you might work in fisheries and then you go back to sharks. You might go work for coral reefs and go back to sharks. You might go work at a job at a restaurant because you need to pay the bills and you just can't find the funding for the work that you want to do. And then you go back into sharks. Like it's all different. It's just, can you have the patience and the passion to continue on doing what you want to do? And that's the secret.
Yeah. All right, Andrew. Hey, it was great having you on. I really appreciate you coming on here. I think it's been pretty fantastic. I learned a lot.
Well, thank you. I apologize. I do talk a lot, so I apologize for that, but I had a great time. Thank you so much.
It was great. No, very good. All right.
Awesome.
I will be in touch with you. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, you bet, man. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
That's it. Andrew Lewin, marine biologist. Thanks so much for coming on the show. And if you like this content, give a like, subscribe, comment down below. My name is Shane. Your name's awesome for watching this video all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. Amazing. Talk to you later.